Welcome to the Musicians Creating Prosperity podcast, where you'll discover business, mindset, and leadership strategies to put your music business on autopilot. I'm your host, Dr. Fabiana Claure, pianist and former university professor turned seven-figure entrepreneur dedicated to empowering artists worldwide. Whether you're a seasoned musician or other creative entrepreneur, this podcast is your guide to financial, artistic, and lifestyle freedom. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the Musicians Creating Prosperity podcast. I am thrilled to introduce our guest speaker for today, Dr. Heidi Begay, and really excited to be able to have a conversation talking about how musicians can build multi-passionate businesses through a variety of interests and a variety of avenues. Welcome, Heidi. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Fabiana. I am so stoked to be here, and thank you for the invite.
Absolutely. A little more background on Heidi for those of you who are just tuning in. Heidi is a passionate serial entrepreneur wearing different hats to empower the modern day musicians. She serves her clientele to amplify their unique voice on and off stage through her three companies, Flute 360, JNK Productions, and Red House Productions. And I'm excited to dive in because you've done so many different things. So we're going to just get started. Thanks again for being here, Heidi.
Oh, thank you, Fabiana.
So let's dive right in. Why don't you maybe share a little bit more about your entrepreneurial journey? What has brought you to this moment in doing the things that you are doing now? Give us a little crash course on Heidi's journey for a little bit.
Oh my goodness. So I did not originally see myself as being an entrepreneur. So I want to put that out there for any musician who's kind of diving into this space or dipping their big toe into the water and thinking, is entrepreneurship for me? I never saw this for me, but is it possible? It is, because I never saw myself as a businesswoman. And actually, I'm so glad that my career unfolded this way. And we can get into the pros of being your own boss here, I'm sure, later in the conversation. But I strove to be actually an academic flute professor. That was the end goal in mind. So I had a very traditional path, like a lot of your listeners. I got the 3 degrees. And then afterwards, I thought, okay, let me get that traditional path job. And actually, the market was shifting right from underneath my feet, actually, as I was doing the DMA and everything. And I was unaware. I was unaware of these changes in the market, and I was just very gung-ho on getting that one job, filling that one position, and nothing would change my mind. But the music industry had shifted so much that by the time I left my DMA program and the pandemic had started in 2020, I really was lovingly forced to take my blinders off and start noticing the breadcrumbs around me and pivoting and shifting a few degrees here and there. And I wound up being a businesswoman of 3 different companies. And so I'm really thankful for those changes during the time. Change can be hard, but looking back in hindsight, it's like, oh, wow, that panned out really well.
Yes, that's so wonderful. I mean, necessity is the mother of innovation, right? And when you have this opportunity to disrupt what you thought you needed, it forces you to be more creative and resourceful in finding avenues that perhaps looking back now, you may be like many people that I talk to who say, hey, I'm so happy I didn't get what I wanted initially because I got so much more instead. Do you find that that's perhaps your story as well?
Oh, of course. And that is my story, but I do want to preface to the listener, it is not always easy. And when you're not getting what you desire initially, it can feel tragic. It was probably, this sounds very bold, but it really was, Fabiana. It was one of the 2 worst years of my life. It was a horrible season. It was so dark where you can't even see the hand in front of you, and it's only 5 inches in front of your face. That's how bleak it can be. And so, yes, it's now much, much, much better. And there are roses and everything. I just don't want to give listeners the false impression if they're going through a pivot and going, hey, but that crazy Heidi chick said, oh, it was easy, it was fun. it wasn't easy initially, but over time, when I started putting the right tools in my toolbox and started realizing the opportunities of abundance that were right around me that could really fulfill me both creatively and financially, I was really blown away. And so I'm very humbled to say that we're blessed in that way.
That's fantastic. Well, let's kind of break these down a little bit for our listeners. First of all, if you can give us an overview of what are your three companies? What are these three ventures that you built as a result of this disruption, this opportunity that you had? Tell us a little bit about each one of them and how do they kind of come together in your bucket of skill sets?
Yes. So actually, I believe and I really feel like these three businesses unfolded from my story. And once people got wind and once people saw proof in the pudding of what Eric and I, my husband, what we were putting out there, they started coming and knocking at our door and saying, how are you doing that? What are you doing? How did you make that pivot? We would love to use you for your music and your tech skills. We want to hire you. It was really cool to see how at first I didn't know where I was going to be in the industry. But the more I networked, the more I built a clientele. I didn't know it was a clientele at first, but the more I networked and build relationships, the more I realized like, oh, wow, I can be used. I do hold value. Even if I'm not on that traditional path, I'm over here making my own opportunities in really fun and creative ways. So to answer your question, Fabiana, my three businesses unfolded from my story. I'm a flutist. I'm an educator. I'm in the music tech space. And my husband is as well. He's a guitarist, audio, video, tech editor. And so you have to kind of really go back to our story at the end of the DMA when it was time for me to build out and create my dissertation. I didn't know what my research was going to be. I was going to expand on some Native American flute literature, but my advisors and especially my husband really encouraged me to start a flute podcast. And that flute podcast is and was Flute 360. And so it's really neat to see how I used a very traditional means to an end of obtaining a terminal degree with a dissertation. And that same creative project unfolded through different lenses. It, for a while, was that dissertation. Then it was a creative hobby. And then it was a resume builder. I thought, ooh, this would be really good for a search committee to see that she's ticking off the boxes of publications and creative work. So I thought, well, that's going to be one of my tickets into being that music professor. And lo and behold, the next lens that Flute 360 found itself to be in was then being a marketing arm shining a light onto my flute studio. And that happened very organically. But I obviously had to, I watched it grow and Flute 360 grew its own legs, but I had to, of course, nurture it. But it was taking shape on its own. And so I made that pivot. And I do want to underline this for any musician out there who is trying more entrepreneurial opportunities. And that is, I had to make a shift of how I treated Flute 360. So for a long time, I was planting corn, hobby, resume builder, and I was getting corn results. But then when the pandemic happened and I had to lovingly see my Flute 360 as a business opportunity and not as a hobby, I had to start planting wheat to get wheat results. So one of my big nuggets that I can offer somebody is that if you plant corn, you're not going to get wheat. You really have to shift and have a paradigm shift to realize, oh, I'm going to sit in the CEO chair now. I'm not a hobbyist, because hobbyists, as much as we love, that craft, you don't get paid. So you're not a hobbyist, but, if you really want business results, you have to sit from that CEO chair. And then long story short, I got into building up my flute studio nationally and internationally. And then flutists got wind that Eric is an audio engineer and he's married to a flutist. Who are they going to hire with their album and their recordings for music festivals? They're going to entrust an audio engineer who's married to a flutist. It gives them a huge sense of peace. And so that's JNK Productions. And we do a lot of live sound. And then once people got wind of, Eric edits Heidi's podcast, Flute 360, she's kind of a techie girl in this, flute music space. I want to hire Eric to be our podcast editor for our show. And so therefore that's Red House Productions.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so let's break this up. When you said I had to shift from seeing my podcast as just a creative outlet and like a side thing and just like a hobby to now turning it into a real lead magnet, a marketing piece for my online, for my flute studio. Um, let's talk about that because I think that on surface is something extremely important for our listeners, which is the fact that everything we do creatively, whether it's a podcast, whether it's releasing an album, whether it's putting out videos and on your YouTube channel, everything that you do creatively, writing a book, releasing a series of books, whatever that looks like, when you approach it as a marketing tool for a larger business behind that, that is the secret of putting together business and arts. When you can see everything you do creatively, not thinking of that creative piece as the end result, but instead seeing it as a stepping stone for something bigger behind that. Now you actually have a reason to be creative. You have a business reason to focus on creativity, whether it's your podcast, a book, an album, going on tour, whatever you do as an artist, where traditionally you would say, well, I mean, how much money can I really make out of a podcast or a book or an album? The reasons why so many musicians are feeling, I guess, frustrated about, embarking in a career that seemingly doesn't create enough profitability, right? Gigging, all these things that most musicians do for a living. When you stop making those things for a living and instead you use those as a marketing piece for a business behind that, whether it's a flute studio, whether it's a coaching program, whether it's something that allows you to monetize your knowledge, not just the initial creative output. This is important because now you have a reason to be creative and it's not just, oh, I'm a passionate, person, but it's like I merge passion with profitability. Do you want to add on something to that?
No, I think you said that perfectly. And that's what I try to help my flute students, especially those who are in gap years between an undergraduate program, a master's program, or a doctoral program. Yes, they are working on their artistry in the Flute 360 studio, but they know when they are onboarded, especially if they're like mid-20s plus, and they're really trying to find their foot in the industry, they are working with me in this duality world where I'm helping them thinking more entrepreneurially so that way they can be independent. What can you do with this degree in multifaceted different ways and your unique skill sets that only you can provide your people as they are building up their artistry in lessons and coaching with me. And that's very important because I want to start spreading this knowledge into the industry. And that's why we do podcasts like this, because I don't want another young musician or another young flutist to feel like I did. Nobody told me. I feel so alone. I feel like I failed. And that's nothing but the truth. That's so far from the truth. We just have to get creative and really build out those monetary opportunities so that way you can provide for yourself. We all need shelter, clothes, and food. So if we can empower you for you to know that that is possible for you and for your life, then you can create in abundance because you are provided for and you feel safe and secure. And then, oh my gosh, look at what my art is providing for me and my family.
That's so important. Creating that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? That idea of building the foundation for you to actually be in a place of safety so that your brain can actually create. If we're constantly worried about this lion chasing us, it's like subconsciously the body interprets it as you're unsure of where the money's coming from. You're unsure of whether you're going to be able to pay your rent next month. You're unsure of how you're going to cover your expenses. Then you cannot create in that state of mind. It's just really difficult, right? And challenging. So let's talk about some of the things you did to find yourself more stable, more comfortable. And entrepreneurship is never a game where you can, at least for me personally, it's never been this thing of like, I made it. Now it's all fine. Yay. Like I remember many of my students when I was at the university would ask me, Dr. Claure, at which point did you feel like you had accomplished everything, right? At which point did you feel you were set for life? And I was like, I'll tell you when I get there. I don't know what you're talking about. That's not happened. And I don't see it happening anytime soon, So I think a lot of times people, feel like, oh, this person's made it. They've got all this success. And what they don't understand is that at each new level, there's a new devil. right? There's a new challenge. There's something different that you're going to have to overcome. And it may be a different challenge than when you started. But I think it would be helpful if maybe you can take us back to when you say you started making a shift in the way you approached your podcast and really becoming an expert in that whole world of not just building your podcast, but then guiding other people and building their podcasts, et cetera. What were some of the shifts specifically that you made that made it feel like you were now using it more strategically as a marketing piece for your business?
Ooh, excellent question. And my preface is the academia world that I was trained in, and I know you were trained in as well. Academia and the real world and actually providing a service for your clientele, they're two completely different worlds. And that was one of the huge shifts I had to make. Because remember, Flute 360 was a dissertation. So it was a research project. So I didn't realize this, but for the first 100 episodes, when it was that research project and my hobby, I was still very much writing as if Flute 360 was a flute magazine. And I was putting out scholarly content. And I realized at some point when I was planting that corn and continuing to plant corn, but I was expecting business results or wheat results, I was realizing, oh, wait, content over here versus content in this world over here of finding my tribe, finding my people who I want to work with. That content writing and a lot of other things, content writing is just one example, but those two worlds are completely separate. So the minute I realized like, oh, this is no longer a research paper, I didn't treat it like this glorified Flute magazine article. It was me then listening and realizing, oh, who do I want to serve? Oh, these are my tribe's people. What are their pain points? And I started listening to my people, and where they were and where I was two completely different spots. I was missing the mark. I was serving the publication system. I wasn't serving flutists who needed help with their artistry, building careers, finding their voice, defeating imposter syndrome. The minute I started talking to those flutists, that's when the floodgates opened and they realized, oh, Heidi and her services are here to help me and to serve me so that way I can really thrive.
That's so powerful. And would you say that perhaps a part of that shift was also realizing that this podcast, your creative outlet, was really more about your audience than it was about yourself? Whereas at the first few episodes, you said the first 100 episodes, you were trying to prove to the world that you could be scholarly and you could, create content that was going to be potentially published and repurposed for like academic life, and seeking that external validation from the institutions, so to speak, and the publications. And in a way, you are making it more about what you needed the world to know so that you could be, recognized or whatever, right? That validation, versus now switching into actually the best way I can serve is by really understanding who are the people that need my services and speaking about what they want and putting myself in their shoes and actually being of service to my community who are ready to work with me right now, who don't need me to have 10,000 publications or have this or that, who just need to listen to my voice and be touched because they know that I understand them.
Beautifully said. I love that. Yes, tenfold. And I think I kept on that academic hat for so long because I didn't know the possibility of attracting my ideal client to my services. Because again, I was trying to attract that one academic job, right? So I was appeasing the committee. I think I went that route for so long because I didn't know the other opportunities and the other possibilities to what Flute 360 could be.
I love that. I love that. So I think for anyone listening to this, if you have so far been putting content out there, whether it's videos, whether it's a podcast, any other content that you've been putting out as a listener that you find is not getting the response that you want, perhaps you're feeling like, maybe people don't want this. Maybe I'm not smart enough. Maybe I don't have enough value. And there's any signs of trying to look at the lack of results as proof of your inabilities or incapabilities. Here's a hack for you today. listen to what Dr. Begay, listen to what Heidi's sharing, and ask yourself, have you really been making this about you too much? Or have you been making it about your audience? And if the answer is, yeah, it's actually been more about me, then that's already something you can change right away. And you can start asking yourself, what do my potential clients, what does my community need to hear so that they feel heard and understood through what I'm teaching? And it creates excitement and belief in a new potential, whether it's around learning to play an instrument, whether it's around performance anxiety, whether it's around career development, whatever that looks like for you specifically. I'm talking to the listener, right? Have you been making it about you, or have you been making it around you, what your audience needs? And I can assure you that if you switch to focusing on your audience and talking to them, I'm literally modeling that right now in this podcast. I'm talking to you, the listener. Like, what are you doing right now? Let's change that, right? Let's change your strategy. But Heidi, I'll let you add anything else to this. Like, I think this is super important. What else would you have to add to that, or anything else that what I'm saying?
No, I love that. And I think piggybacking off of knowing who your audience is, when I talk to musicians about that, they kind of get deer in headlights a little bit, and it's okay. And one of the biggest questions I get asked all the time is, and I empathize, they ask me, well, who is my audience? And that's a good question. Because at first, when I was putting out these Flute 360 episodes, it kind of felt like, and I don't know if you guys can see me, but I'm hitting my microphone like, hello, who's out there?
Yeah.
It felt like I was talking into a void. I didn't know who my listeners were. I saw the numbers through Lipson.
Yeah.
So I was getting 100 downloads a month, 500, and the number kept increasing. But I didn't know who these flutists were. So you have to ask. You have to put yourself out there and actually through the microphone or through your social media post or through your blog and say, I know you're there. I know you're reading. My WordPress website's telling me about the traffic. I know you're there. But you, as the creator, as the business owner, you have to say, I want to get to know you, the individual, the reader, the listener, because they keep tuning in. They keep coming back to your platform to consume the content. And if you extend this warm gesture and extend your hand out to them saying, I am a welcoming person. I want to get to know you better because I'm here to serve you. Where are you? What are your pain points? What are your dreams? You have to put yourself out there. And I know it can feel like a little bit like dating, a little awkward of like, oh, I don't want to be rejected. And who am I? And I don't want to annoy anyone. You're not. They're coming to your platform. They're consuming content. And so it's a relationship. So if you can ask those questions of, who are you? What do you like? What do you want to aspire to be? And get to know them better, then you're going to start really figuring out who your true dream client is. And then you can start serving them at full capacity.
Thank you so much for adding that. Yes, that's so important, because essentially what we've discussed in this little section here is there's the macro strategy of creating long form content and this and that, and speaking to the internet, right? Like putting it out there for everyone to access. And then there's the micro connection opportunities that you're discussing, which is actually making a point of talking to your audience individually and asking questions around, what do you need in your life? What are you stuck with? How are you trying to change what you're doing? What are some of the solutions that you've obtained? And actually having real conversations. It can be on the phone. It can be over DMs. It can be in Zoom sessions, but actually reaching out, taking this a step further to not just creating content, which is important, but then to using that as a way to start conversations and to be able to share with your audience that you actually want to speak to them. Because when you talk to your audience, when you talk to individual people one-on-one basis, you get a wealth of information of what they need. And that in turn fuels more ideas for content. So it's a win-win. When you talk to people and they're telling you, hey, I'm struggling with this. I don't really know how to play this or, create this podcast or do whatever. Now you can actually create more content that's going to speak to what they just told you. So it becomes a whole beautiful circle of connection and creation, right? So thank you so much for adding that. Anything else you want to add to that? It's so good. I just want to make sure we really make this so clear to people.
Yeah, no, I love it. And there are a lot of thoughts around this. I guess the last thing I will put a bow on this, and that is the reason why I bring that up of musicians have sometimes a difficult time initiating that relationship is because I find that a lot of musicians self-identify-ish as an introvert. And then their comfort blanket at times could be their instrument. But, and that makes them feel good. They feel safe there.
Yeah.
But being asked and being encouraged to nudge them to say, hey, put out your hand and start that relationship and start talking, I can see a little bit of cringe and a little bit of people backing away. So I just want to encourage the listener right now, like if you feel that that's you're not alone. And when I know I'm scared of something or I'm a little fearful and I'm told, hey, a lot of people go through this, you're not alone. I'm like, oh, okay. I'm not totally, off here. I feel comforted knowing that people struggle with the same issue. So I'm just getting encouragement. Like if that networking and those building of relationships feels a little scary to you, you're not alone. A lot of musicians go through that, but it is a skill. You can build a skill of networking. It's not like this learned thing that, well, some people may be more inclined where it feels natural to them. But if you feel like, oh, I am an introvert, I don't identify being an extrovert, you can learn the skill and it can be a tool that you put into your toolbox.
Yes, so good. So good. Oh my goodness. I will add just a couple more things to this. The first one is if you're finding yourself feeling like, oh no, but I'm just an introvert. I don't like talking to people, this and that. One of the ways you can get out of that, as well as what Heidi's just said, is also recognizing that if you do this, you're making this about the business you're building, the service you're trying to provide. You're ultimately doing this out of a gesture of service, because unless you're willing to create that visibility for your content, talk to people, actually extend that invitation that Heidi just described, people will stay stuck. People will continue struggling with whatever they're struggling. And so when you're able to shift the mindset from like, oh, I don't know how people are going to take this and what are they going to think about me? And once again, making it about you, if you can shift it and make it about the people you're going to serve. And if you can be more bothered by thinking that your ideal clients are going to be stuck forever or for a long time, unless you're willing to come out of your shell and speak and get out of this comfort lane that you may be in, when you can be more motivated by not allowing that to happen than you are by whether or not people are going to like you or think about you, when you care more about fixing the problem for your ideal clients, let's put it that way, when the desire to help compensates, overrides the fear of what people are going to think about you, that's when you can start getting out of your shell. And it's no longer going to be so much a concern, because it's like, okay, if you don't do this, people are going to still suffer. Are you okay with that? No, I'm not okay with that. Good. Now get out of your shell. Boom. That's one thing. The other thing is networking. You just mentioned the idea of being surrounded by people. We are always a result of the environment that we surround ourselves with. We know that, right? There's the people you surround yourself have an influence in your perspective. And if you find yourself surrounded by people who are doubting, who are creating uncertainty, who are hesitant, who don't believe, or who are attaching their definition of success to something that is maybe a past definition that you had and you no longer want it, who are holding you into your past self, because that's what makes them feel that they know you, that they can relate to you. There's so many reasons why when you are attaching yourself to people that are not providing that guidance, that inspiration, that accountability, that community, that is important, because if you find people that are doing what you want to do, then it no longer feels like a big leap. You're now simply saying, hey, I'm actually just going to follow what I've seen people do here. And why? I mean, if it worked for all of them, why wouldn't it work for me? And in a way, you're going to create that in your own message, in your own business, because you're going to stand up and share to the world, hey, I have this solution, right? Hopefully, if you're doing this like in the ideal way, you're going to share, about what you can do for people and why it's important. And you're going to build a community of your own. So your students, your clients can come in and be surrounded by believers, by doers, by thinkers, by action takers, just like you. So then you need to start by acting as that student that you want to attract. You need to be that student. You need to surround yourself by people who are going to be able to lift you up and who are going to show you, hey, you don't need to work so hard. You can do things in a more strategic way. Here, follow this path. This is a way that it's been done before. And really seeking out that not having to reinvent the wheel, right? Seeking out templates, platforms, connections, accountability, communities that are normalizing what you first may be thinking feels uncomfortable. This is a long expansion, but I mean, I just really wanted to dig into what you said, Heidi, but I don't know if you want to add anything else to that or maybe jump onto something else too as well.
No, and we are kind of jumping into a new topic naturally. I love the segue from one podcast host to the other. I love when this happens. You bring up another topic, and that is you are the summation of the 5 people you hang out with. You are. And what you just said, when you surround yourself with people who are action takers, achievers, and they're doing these things that you may not be aware of, but you're in their circle, you start digesting and soaking up like a sponge their vocabulary, their mindset. And a great example of this is I hold a monthly musicpreneur mastermind among me, my friends, and other music business owners. We meet once a month for accountability, but for also new ideas to be generated and inspiration. And case in point, I have done so much organic marketing these past 3-4 years that I never really dove into paid ads and funnels. That scared me. But the minute I started surrounding myself with these other music business owners, they were talking about the 2 gentlemen, Sam Reddy and Jared Judge. They were talking about paid advertisement in this mastermind setting every month. And the next thing you know, I'm creating a funnel for my first time in ClickFunnels. I got some help. I got some coaching because I know I can't do it alone. And next thing you know, I'm running challenges through ClickFunnels and putting out email sequences and doing everything through this 5-day challenge. And I'm like, who am I? What is this? And it was such a great learning process. And I was scared at first, but it wasn't as scary because that language, that mindset, and the action taking that Sam and Jared and others demonstrated to me became my new reality. Then it was like, oh, okay, this isn't so scary. And by the end of the whole thing, I learned more about my 360er. I learned more about the things that I'm passionate about. And I started learning about Facebook ads and funnels, and I felt really proud of myself. So that's a really good example of you are the summation of the 5 people who you hang out with.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's beautiful, right? Because the truth is, if we can create these communities for our clients, then it allows us to do one thing that is incredibly important, which is to transition your models where you have now leveraged models that don't require you so much one-on-one time with your clients. And this is something that, I'm extremely passionate about, is really flipping the switch for you, not to need to be one-on-one so much, but instead have communities that you build that allow people to come in and just dive into your brain, your content, learn about your values, your systems, your beliefs, and just surround themselves by everything you've built and learn through that, like by osmosis, basically, by immersion. And then you can come in and do weekly group sessions, like a masterclass where they can take turns asking you questions or playing for you, whatever that looks like. But just the value of the relationships they get to build in your container is incredible. And so the power of building this community and being in a community doesn't just give you that ideal perspective, but it also does it for your clients, right? So if you can emphasize, look into where in your business right now, as you're listening to this, are you creating community? Are you surrounded with the right community? These are questions you need to ask yourself, because if the answer is no and no, that's probably why you're not yet reaching your goals. And the good news is there's an answer. There's solutions for that. You don't have to go at it alone. And certainly not want to create an environment where your students need you on a one-on-one basis all the time, right? So I think we've opened a Pandora box now with this one-on-one versus group, etc. But I would love to know your thoughts, Heidi, on flipping the switch for most musicians who've been programmed to believe that unless it's one-on-one, it's not as valuable, blah, blah, blah.
Oh my goodness. There are so many creative ways in which you can structure your offerings. Really think about the end result that you want for your business. Do you want to have a 3-day work week? Do you want to work 1 day a week? And figure out and reverse engineer it and figure out what those steps and what those offerings would look like to give you that lifestyle that you are searching for, right? And so under Flute 360, yes, I do have some private lessons, but it's limited. I only teach X amount of students a year. And that's great because I can really dive in because I really do like the one-on-one. My educator self really thrives in that environment. I feel extremely fulfilled that way. But between my master's and my DMA, I know that for me, at least, it wasn't sustainable because during those 6 years, I taught 60 flute students in Fort Worth, one-on-one. So I go back in time and share that with you because that was one of the reasons why I said, okay, let me go and pursue the DMA, right? So coming out of the doctorate and building my business, one of the questions I asked myself when I was building out these offerings, do you want to go back to those 6 years and teach 60 students again? And I said, that was a great season. I loved every minute of it, but heck no. I need more time for my husband. I need more time for me. I need more time for my fur babies. And I'm an auntie. I love being with my family and spoiling them. So it's like, okay, then having everything be structured, being structured in that one-on-one capacity was not ideal for the schedule that I wanted to create. So Flute 360 has subscriptions. We have a library vault. We have group lessons, and the subscription is a godsend. I love my subscription Flute 360 Accelerator program. And it allows, like what you said earlier, Fabiana, for people to come in and out and still progress towards their goals, but they don't have necessarily that one-on-one time with me. But it's still a win-win. It's a win for me. It's a win for my client. And I just encourage any musician out there to think outside of the box. Maybe take pen to paper and write down 50 to 100 different ways in which you can get paid in these different creative capacities, and put your creative cap on. It's funny, Fabiana, us musicians, we are so creative when it comes to tone, color exploration and musical interpretation. And I would love to encourage musicians to take that same creativity and bring it over here into business world and feed your different business ideas with that same creativity. And you're going to be very surprised. You could be very surprised of all the different ways that your mind comes up with and how you can get paid in different ways, whether it is that one-on-one or group or whatever you're looking for. I hope I answered your question.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. This is so powerful. Because the truth is absolutely, you can make it this whatever you want. If you want to have a portion of one-on-ones, there's no shame in that. Of course, you can absolutely do that, but you understand that the business is not relying 100% on that income, right? Now you have, it's just like when you perform, when you create your videos, when you publish your book, chances are you're not going to make the bulk of your livelihood through that avenue, right? However, if it's something that you love doing, by all means, stick to it, but build yourself a model that is more leveraged on top of that so that you don't rely exclusively on the income from your gigging, on the income from your podcast, on the income from your album, on the income from your one-on-ones. Instead, build yourself a model where people can access your knowledge, not need your time anymore. I think this is the key takeaway that I will never get tired of repeating in this podcast because I know musicians really need to hear it. But kind of transitioning now into like our last questions around time, because we're kind of segueing into this idea of being able to protect your time and build businesses that allow you to be more in control of your time. I would love your input on what are some of the management strategies that you've developed to be able to control your time with 3 companies, a busy life and a career. How do you reconcile the potential challenges, tensions that you may have in your week-to-week, day-to-day life as it relates to just your time management?
Great question. Yes. Well, employees definitely help. So the first year it was my husband and I building out everything, doing all the different things, wearing all the different hats. And then when it grows, you have the luxury of onboarding people so you can delegate that work to people where it's their strong suit and they are happy to serve in that way. So employees definitely help for sure. But that's a great question. With time, it's really interesting. The way I like to think about a lot of things is keep it simple, smarty. So I like to remind myself, kiss it. And if it starts getting overcomplicated or crazy, then I'm like, okay, Heidi, streamline, cinch it back in. We can cut off the fluff. And I really believe that time, money, and energy all should be streamlined towards the same goal. So that way you can really feel like the horse is pulling the cart in one direction, and you have momentum and you see progress when everything is streamlined rather than feeling scattered and all over the place. So this is a very typical answer, but it is very true. To help me streamline my time, money, and energy, I put systems in place. If those systems aren't there, I can't. Trust me, Fabiana. I am this crazy girl who, has ADHD and, squirrel here, squirrel there. And for me to focus, I have to be very intentional because I know how my mind can wander and I know how I could possibly not hit the goals I want to hit if I'm not careful. So for me, I am very strategic in the fact that if I don't have that Calendly app, if I don't have my reminders, if I don't have QuickBooks, if I don't have these resources, Buffer, Hootsuite, if I don't have these tools in place to aid me, then I'm going to feel scattered and all over the place. And then once I have those systems in place, then it trickles down beautifully into working with Eric, my husband, and then working and conveying information in an organized, concise way to my employees. And then this way, they're not pulling out their hair. I'm not pulling out my hair. And that would be my encouragement to the listener. Figure out the system that works well for you, streamline those different resources towards your goal, and then you're going to be more focused and have clarity rather than running around, feeling like a chicken with your head cut off.
I love that. And I have to say, I loved how you started. It helps with employees. So let's talk about that because I think musicians have sometimes resistance to outsourcing the work and delegation and releasing that perfectionism and that control over every aspect of their businesses because they feel that, no one's really going to do it the way they do it. Right. And they're just not going to be as good. And so the fact that you just started by saying, hello, it's not just me. I use people. I help. I have a team. It's not just, I'm not superwoman here.
Yeah. No.
This is important because I think it's not there's not enough conversations about this in the industry. And so let's talk about what were some of the mindset shifts that you had to create internally to decide to delegate, to say, you know what, I need to start hiring and find someone to help me. What was which point in the journey did you come to that moment of realization that you don't have to do everything on your own?
Very interesting. So for me, at least, my answer, I think, is going to be a little different than the average listener. And that is, I have no problem in the action of handing something off to somebody else and entrusting their ability to complete the task at hand. To me, I have no problem with that. My problem of starting to onboard employees was the financial aspect. I didn't necessarily have the funds right away to hire, and I was putting off hiring until I hit a certain income thresh. And at some point I was like, I'm going to kill myself wearing all these different hats, and I'm just going to have to bite the bullet. Even though really technically right now I can't afford a virtual assistant. Technically right now I can't hire another audio engineer to help Eric. My conclusion was, yes, you can't afford that right now. That was the lie I was telling myself, but you can't afford not to hire them. That was my big aha moment. I was like, doink. And then I pulled the trigger and I was like, this is what I got to do. In order to grow, I need more people helping me and Eric, supporting us, working towards that goal together. And by doing that, it will grow, it will scale because there's more hands on and I can delegate. And then I can, as the CEO and as the teacher, come over into my area of expertise and really thrive and really give my people who have hired me, who do want to pick my brain, who want to work with me, I can give them 110% of Heidi as, compared to, oh my gosh, I'm depleted. Here's 70 of me. Here's 70% of me. I'm doing my best. It feels nice to be on this side to go, okay, this is where I get to be. This is where I get to thrive. And then, yes, of course, I come over to these different departments and manage and check. But it is really nice to be supported in that way. And yeah, you can't afford not to. That's the biggest thing I would offer somebody.
Wow. That is so powerful. You're absolutely right. It's not just a mindset. Sometimes it's a financial mindset. It's still a mindset, but it's around finances, not around perfectionism necessarily. Right. And so this idea of I cannot afford to continue basically sacrificing the growth of my company because I want to be the bottleneck of everything. And instead being able to let go of that and say, when I bring in people, I will actually create more abundance because I'm going to be working in my zone of genius and I'll have someone really take off some of this additional load that is not what I should be doing, even though you're probably really good. You had to learn to be good at it, but it's not something that is in the best interest of your company. When you start thinking in the best interest of your company and really seeing that when you hire someone, you're actually investing in your company as an asset. You're treating your business as an asset. And that is when the shift happens. This mindset shift of knowing every investment you make in your business, if you do it strategically, if you are responsible, if you are, dedicated, if you are willing to coach your team to success, not just dump a bunch of stuff on them and then making them 100% responsible for it, right? You need to also know how to delegate, how to hold your team accountable, how to support them in reaching the goals. Once you know how to do that, then yes, bringing someone in, even if you're not financially ready, will be the quickest way for you to actually get financially ready. Yeah. So thank you for saying that, Heidi. This is so powerful. So we're approaching the end of our time. I know we could continue talking about this for days on end. I see so much synchronicity in your perspective, and this is why I love having you in here. But I would love for you to maybe share some final thoughts that you would say to our listeners today in our podcast. What words of advice would you have to say to those musicians who may have a thriving business right now, but their time is completely taken and they're in a place of burnout and they don't know how else they can shift? And what are some of the ways that they may be overdoing it and overcomplicating it? What would be some strategies that you would share to help them keep it simple and focus on what really matters?
Yes. So if you are in that stage of trying to build out that business and you do feel burnt out, again, it goes back to that mantra, not to be repetitive, but really keep it simple, smarty, kiss it, make it fun, streamline it. And in the beginning stages, I don't know how you feel about this, Fabiana, but for me, at least in the beginning stages of building my businesses, I was on the brink of burnout because I was doing all the things. So if you're in that season right now, it's okay. And as you're pivoting and growing the business, some things at first may need to be sacrificed, but remind yourself it's just for a season. Mm-hmm. And then once you get through that, and this is what Fabiana said that's so important, is it's that strategy. So really pulling in mentors who have walked the walk is so imperative. If you're trying to do it on your own wisdom, if you're trying to do it on your own experiences, that's great. It's going to get you up to a certain extent and up to a certain summit. But if you're really trying to thrive and grow your business, you need to put yourself in a support system that's going to help you get to your summit 9, your summit 10, etc. We cannot do it alone. I am convinced of this. And if you see somebody like Fabiana, who is walking the walk and she knows the ins and outs of building out a thriving business, you reach out to those mentors. Don't think you have to do it alone. And I think maybe in a way too, it kind of circles back to how us musicians are trained and programmed. A lot of our creating our art is in an individualized practice room. We do a lot of independent work with the metronome and with our practice journals and with the tuner. And maybe we lose sense and we lose touch of the people who are around us who are willing to help us. So feel free to reach out and ask for help so that way you can get to that next summit. So kiss it, streamline it, and really pull yourself into a really great support system with people who are doing what you want to do. So that way it can build up that strategy and you can get to your goal quicker.
I love that. Thank you so much for adding that. Kiss it. I love it. Kiss it. Kiss your business, folks. This is simple. Just kiss it. I love that. I love that. Well, thank you so much for being in this show today. I really appreciate your time and incredible wisdom and expertise. Is there any place you would like to send our listeners to learn more about you, your work? Where would you like to send them to check out Heidi's world?
Yeah. If you go to HeidiBegay.com, everything is there. My podcast is there. And If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I do love making new friends, and you can find me on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook.
Let's go. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabiana.